When I was reborn to the moment Ethan proposed divorce for the second time, I signed the divorce agreement without the slightest hesitation. Ethan didn't know that a year later, Harrington Group would suffer enormous deficits and losses due to the betrayal of the top executives at the headquarters. Later, under the joint attacks of business rivals, the situation worsened, ultimately ending in bankruptcy. The once glorious Harrington Group fell from grace overnight, and Ethan, the heir to the group, became a destitute man with no money, so poor that he could only live in a basement and eat instant noodles. At that time, I truly loved him and was willing to endure hardship with him. Even if he had nothing, as long as I could be by his side, I was content. But I never expected that even under such circumstances, Ethan's heart remained fixated on his beloved white moonlight. Even when I was pregnant and in labor, he abandoned me, a woman the doctors had identified as a high-risk patient, to take care of his white moonlight's child. In the end, because his signature was delayed, both my child and I died on the operating table, while his white moonlight's son merely had a mild cold. Celia, stop making a scene and just sign the papers. What's the point of continuing this loveless marriage? I know you've wasted your youth all these years accompanying me, so I won't shortchange you. I'll give you enough material comfort to live in luxury for the rest of your life, something many people could never achieve even with a lifetime of effort. Ethan initially felt some guilt, but as he spoke these words, his tone carried a hint of condescension and charity. I was just an ordinary girl from a humble background, unworthy of Ethan in terms of status. Back then, I was blindly devoted, never considering anything else. Deep down, I believed I wanted nothing from Ethan, not even after marriage. I worked hard to support myself, never touching the living allowance he provided. Secretly, I thought this would make us equals, that money wouldn't tarnish the purest love I had for him. I never bothered to explore Ethan's true thoughts. Looking back now, it's no surprise he had such a sense of superiority. Ethan never truly respected me. I was just a comfort to him during his lonely moments. Well, thank you, Ethan. It let an ordinary person like me rise to success overnight, I said with a smile. Given a second chance at life, these words weren't sarcastic but spoken with utter sincerity. The bankruptcy of Harrington Group and those hard times spent with Ethan made me realize the importance of money. Once a love-struck mind wakes up, it truly sees the world for what it is. Those past experiences seem like fleeting clouds now, nothing compared to the tangible wealth in hand. A man may betray you, but money never will. Ethan was the first man I ever loved. During high school, the day he rescued me from older bullies, he seemed like a god. I fell for him stubbornly and hopelessly, even though he loved another girl and carried a white moonlight in his heart, I still adored him silently. Until his white moonlight abandoned him to go abroad. Heartbroken and seemingly marrying me out of revenge, I didn't mind, I happily got our marriage certificate with him. I thought, even if Ethan didn't like me, as long as I treated him sincerely and gave my all, I could eventually move him. For over 8 years of marriage, more than 3,000 days and nights, I cared for him, loved him, and stayed by his side. Even after he went bankrupt and ruined his kidneys from drinking in despair, I gave him one of mine. At that point, even a stone should have been warmed. Yet the moment his white moonlight returned from abroad after divorcing, crying pitifully in front of him, he instantly chose to forgive her. Then, he placed the divorce papers before me, resolutely demanding we split. In my past life, when I saw the divorce papers Ethan handed to me, I was in disbelief and refused to sign at all. Ethan probably knew I needed time to come to terms with this fact, so he gave me some space. Then, after a month had passed, he brought up the divorce again. Perhaps seeing how utterly heartbroken and miserable I was, Ethan's conscience must have gotten the better of him. This time, the terms of the divorce agreement were even more generous. Not only did he offer an additional $20 million, but he also threw in the villa in the mid-levels and 2 prime commercial properties, each over 300 square meters, in the downtown area's largest shopping mall. At the time, my mind was consumed with the pain of this man who didn't love me, and I couldn't care less about material possessions. I stubbornly refused to divorce him. As Ethan kept bringing it up over and over again, his attitude grew increasingly hostile, until finally, Harrington Group went bankrupt. He had lost the qualification and ability to care for the person he loved, so he no longer mentioned divorce. He couldn't bear to see his white moonlight, Leah, suffer. Yet, after I accompanied him through the hardest times, when things took a turn for the better and he made a comeback, he returned to waiting on Leah hand and foot. Even when I was in labor. I wonder if he felt even a flicker of regret upon learning that both my child and I had died on the operating table. Celia, don't speak in anger. I genuinely want you to live well from now on. Look over the terms of the divorce agreement. If there's anything you're dissatisfied with, just point it out. I'll accommodate you in every way I can. Ethan spoke in a gentle tone. Over all these years, ever since I first got together with him, this was the first time he had shown such patience, just to coax me into signing the divorce papers. What a fine specimen, how could I have been so blind to ever take a liking to such a thing? Living a second life, stripped of all the past glories, I stared at Ethan's still handsome face, feeling nothing but overwhelming disgust at his hypocrisy. After hearing Ethan's words, I picked up the divorce agreement on the table and studied it carefully. Seeing that, in addition to the assets he had allocated to me, he would also provide me with an annual living allowance of 1 million yuan, my mood lifted considerably. It's just that Harrington Group will go bankrupt next year, so installments would essentially be a bounced check. As long as I can get the money right now, I'm even willing to give Ethan a discount. Celia, do you have something in mind? Seeing me examine the divorce agreement seriously, Ethan didn't think I actually wanted a divorce. He assumed I must be scheming another delay tactic. Noticing my unusual expression, he asked. Ignoring Ethan's thoughts, I pointed to the terms on the divorce agreement. If we're getting divorced, let's do it cleanly and never contact each other again. No dragging things out. Instead of paying me annual living expenses in installments, just give me the full amount up front. I finished speaking and noticed Ethan was stunned, then added, I'm 29 this year. Even if I only live to 80, that's still 51 years left. Rounding it down, you just need to give me 50 million. Celia. 50 million is nothing to you, isn't it? If you're unwilling to pay, then this divorce is off. I deliberately said this, confident that Ethan would still think I was trying to stall. Fine, I'll pay it all at once. Celia, if you have any other demands, you can bring them up now. Hearing Ethan's words, my heart leaped with joy, and I couldn't wait to agree and sign over the assets. But I said, Ethan, I've loved you for so many years, dedicating my youth to you. I would do anything for you. Are you really going to divorce me for Leah, not caring at all about our years of love? Once you sign, don't come to regret it. Leah has been putting in a lot of effort lately. Abandoned by her husband abroad and left with nothing, she's been eyeing Ethan like a prized piece of meat, charming him to the point where he's utterly smitten, determined to take care of his poor, fragile white moonlight. Upon hearing my words, that hypocritical look of guilt reappeared on Ethan's face, but he still said firmly, Celia, I'm sorry, but I have no feelings for you. Besides, Leah is at her most vulnerable right now, she needs me. Ethan, don't you dare regret this. With a thoroughly wounded expression, I swiftly and decisively signed the divorce agreement in tears, right after Ethan had his secretary revise the papers. Seeing my decisive signature, Ethan, that scoundrel who thrived on being mistreated, cast a suspicious glance at me, visibly hesitating. My heart raced with urgency, vast wealth and a bright future were so close at hand. There was no way I could let this bastard change his mind. Absolutely not. I cried even more bitterly, seemingly in a fit of pique, and slammed the pen down in front of Ethan. Sign it right now. Once you sign, we'll go straight to the Civil Affairs Bureau. There are plenty of good men in this world. Do you really think I, Celia, can't live without you? Ethan truly believed I couldn't survive without him. In terms of looks, I was once considered campus belle material, enough to attract bullies. Yet, despite so many good men pursuing me over the years, I never gave them a second glance, devoting myself entirely to Ethan alone, never even looking at other men properly. All these years of my blind infatuation and love-struck mindset had given him absolute confidence. The previously hesitant Ethan now harbored no doubts whatsoever. Assuming I was just acting out of spite, he seized the moment to sign the divorce papers immediately. He probably thought that if he hesitated even slightly, I might change my mind once my anger subsided. Watching this scene, I was so thrilled inside. A massive fortune was about to come my way, and luxury apartments, villas, and shops would all be mine in no time. To hide my excitement, I wiped my tears even more vigorously. By rubbing my eyes until they turned red, I could make tears fall easily. I was terrified that Ethan might notice my joy and change his mind. What if he backed out? Ethan, you heartless man, you. Let's go to the Civil Affairs Bureau right now. Whoever hesitates even for a second isn't human. I grabbed Ethan's hand and dragged him toward the Civil Affairs Bureau, putting on such a tragic and determined act that, in that moment, I truly felt like a reincarnated Oscar-winning actress. Celia, I'm sorry. Ethan nodded to the secretary, who immediately understood. After making a phone call, she came over and bowed to Ethan. Ethan, the car is ready. On the surface, I appeared utterly disheartened as I waited for Ethan to leave. Then, the phone rang. It was Ethan's phone. Ethan, come quickly. Ava has fainted from a food allergy. I'm alone with her at the hospital. A woman's voice, choked with tears, came through the phone, filled with fear, panic, and overwhelming dependence. Celia immediately recognized Leah's voice from the side. It was a voice she could never forget, even if she lived another lifetime. It had once been her pain and nightmare. Leah, don't worry, I'll come over right now. Without hesitation, Ethan spoke into the phone, his urgency and heartache completely unconcealed on his face. Even in front of me, his current wife who hasn't even divorced him yet. Celia, something happened to Ava. Leah's health has never been good, she can't handle this alone. I need to go right now. Ethan looked at me, his tone apologetic yet resolute. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. In the past, I'd always felt heartbroken and sorrowful. But this time I was unusually furious and agitated. Just one last step remained, like a perfectly cooked, fragrant duck placed right before you, only to be snatched away at the last moment. How infuriating is that? Ethan, do you even realize what time it is? We're not going shopping or to an amusement park, we're heading to finalize our divorce. And you still want to run off to your Leah at a time like this? Celia, stop being unreasonable. Ava is still so young and has already lost her father. Can't you show a little compassion? I was so angry I nearly had a heart attack. That damn man. If it weren't for the fact that we still had to go through the divorce process at the Civil Affairs Bureau, I swear I would have slapped him across the face twice by now. Ethan finished speaking and didn't even wait for my reaction, immediately heading out the door with his secretary. I grabbed the divorce agreement from the table, stuffed it into my bag, and hurried after him. Drive. Ethan commanded as soon as he got into the car. I barely squeezed in just before the door closed. Celia, what are you following me for? Ethan instinctively furrowed his brows, his face still wearing the same cold and disdainful expression that kept people at bay. I'll go see how severely Leah's child is actually sick that it requires your personal attention. Could it be on the verge of death? In my past life, when I was in labor, Leah used this exact same excuse to summon Ethan away. On the other end of the phone, the situation was described so dire that Ethan abandoned me without a moment's hesitation or second thought. Thinking of that child who shared my blood, the one who never even had the chance to be born and died in the womb. A surge of sorrow and hatred welled up inside me. Celia, I know you hate Leah, but Leah and her child are innocent. They haven't done anything wrong. I told you before, I don't like you. Targeting a child like this is utterly disgraceful. If you don't shut up, get out of the car right now. Ethan was never one to be gentle or accommodating in front of me. His demeanor was always icy, and just moments ago, he had softened slightly out of a sliver of guilt over the divorce. But now, worried about that wretched Leah and her child, his patience vanished, and his expression darkened ominously. I suppressed the hatred in my heart with all my might, otherwise Ethan would really make me get out of the car. At this critical moment of divorce, how could I let him slip away? The ride to the hospital was silent. As soon as Ethan got out of the car, he rushed to the nurse's station to ask for Leah and her daughter's location, then jogged over anxiously, afraid of being even a second late. I followed from behind and saw Leah and her daughter sitting there perfectly fine. Ava, who had reportedly been unconscious on the phone, was now sitting there in tears. The mother and daughter wore identical pitiful expressions, while Ava merely had a few red rashes on her face. When Leah saw Ethan arrive, she ran over and sobbed into his arms. "Oh, Ethan, I was so scared. I was terrified. Ava is my everything now. I couldn't bear it if anything happened to her." Thankfully, the doctor managed to wake her up. I listened from the side, inwardly sneering with disdain. Allergic shock is indeed a real possibility, but the extent of her reaction, just a few red rashes, wasn't even mild by any stretch of the imagination. There was no way she would have fainted. It's just a pity that Ethan, this blind and foolish man, had his brain clogged with crap. He believed every word Leah said. Thinking of my innocent child from my past life who could have been saved if not for this vile woman, my eyes turned red with fury. I charged forward and lashed out at Leah's face several times. Leah was dumbstruck before she could even react, taking the hits without resistance. A few slaps weren't enough to vent my anger, so I grabbed her hair and delivered a few more wild blows, looking every bit the righteous wife tearing into the homewrecker. Ethan hadn't expected such a move from me either, so he didn't even try to intervene. By the time he realized what was happening, he was livid. "Celia, what are you doing? How dare you lay a hand on Leah? Have you lost your mind?" The furious look on Ethan's face seemed like he was about to tear me apart any second. Not only did he pull me away from Leah, but he was also ready to hit me. "Come and look at this shameless pair of scum, that unfaithful woman and the worthless man sneaking around together. Ethan, are you really going to treat your wife like this for the sake of a woman who abandoned you back then and is now so loose?" The crowd had already gathered around. I raised my voice, glaring at Ethan defiantly, waiting for his slap to land. This would make the headlines even more sensational. Although I remained silent the entire car ride to avoid being kicked out, I wasn't idle. I contacted several famous entertainment reporters. Ethan being the heir of Harrington Group meant they wouldn't miss such a sensational story. Likely, they were already staking out the hospital room before we arrived, just waiting to capture some juicy gossip. The flashing lights didn't stop, meaning the scene earlier must have been fully recorded. Celia could already imagine tomorrow's headlines splashed across entertainment news. Harrington Group heir Ethan caught cheating, current girlfriend confronts mistress in epic showdown. Ethan, as the carefully groomed heir of Harrington Group, might have had his brain fogged by Leah, but he wasn't truly stupid. Seeing the situation unfold, he immediately understood and froze, his raised hand halted mid-air. "Celia, it's all a misunderstanding. Stop making a scene. Let's go inside and talk." Ethan's secretary immediately stepped forward, trying to clear the scene. But since I had orchestrated this deliberately, there was no way I would let this farce end so easily. "I won't go in." "Why should I? Being in the same room as that shameless whore would only pollute the air. And that little bitch she spawned, acting all innocent at such a young age, she's clearly inherited her mother's homewrecker genes. Who knows whose husband she'll ruin in the future? Celia, Ava is just a child. How can you say such things about her? I know you've misunderstood my relationship with Ethan, but we are truly innocent. Ethan only takes pity on Ava for growing up without a father's care, that's why he helps us out." Leah maintained her usual weak facade, casting accusing looks at Celia while defending herself. Many people showed some sympathy upon hearing her words. "Leah, cut the act. If you're so innocent, why were you throwing yourself into my husband's arms crying? Have you no sense of boundaries? Stop pretending to be some pure, fragile white lotus. Your daughter's lack of a father isn't my fault, it's because of your shameless mother's affairs. Your ex-husband took a paternity test, discovered the child wasn't his but just a bastard, and that's why he divorced you and kicked the girl out. If I were you, I'd be too ashamed to show my face in public. but you, left penniless and homeless, set your sights on someone else's husband. With such shameless immorality, why should I spare you any courtesy? I didn't even give Leah the chance to settle this behind closed doors. Instead, I directly exposed her disgraceful affair, laying bare her true nature as a shameless homewrecker for all to see. On one hand, she covets another woman's husband, while on the other, she tries to maintain her innocent image. What a clever scheme. But I intend to rip off the mask of Leah's hypocrisy, forcing her to live under the world's disgust and scorn, relegated to hiding in the shadows like a rat scurrying across the street. A flicker of panic crossed Leah's face, probably not expecting me to know her background. Oh my God, there's actually such explosive gossip. The entertainment reporters quickly jotted down what they heard, and I felt a surge of satisfaction. Ethan's expression turned extremely grim. He didn't believe Celia's words at all. In his heart, his white moonbeam was a pure and flawless woman who deserved the best in the world. Even if she had abandoned him back then, it must have been out of helplessness. Now, facing such a pitiful situation and being slandered by me, he must be heartbroken at the moment. Celia, shut your mouth. If you dare slander Leah again, don't blame me for being rude to you. Ethan glared at me fiercely, the warning in his eyes all too evident. Just when everyone thought I would continue the drama, I chose to shut up. I knew Ethan's bottom line all too well. If I kept pushing, the situation would become messy. After all, the divorce papers weren't finalized yet, and Harrington Group hadn't collapsed. Teasing Ethan at the edge of his tolerance was fine, but crossing the line and getting myself dragged down was absolutely unacceptable. At this moment, the security team from Harrington Group arrived, cleared the scene, and the ward returned to quiet. Leah sobbed softly in distress. Celia, you've misunderstood me too deeply. Leah said this, then turned an innocent look toward Ethan. Ethan, believe me, it's not like that. I really didn't do this. Leah, you don't need to explain to her. She's just blinded by jealousy. I stood silently to the side, mentally mocking them. You're the one who's blind and foolish, totally deserving to be fooled by a woman like Leah. Ethan held Leah protectively, comforting her, but glared fiercely at me. Celia, did you think such tricks would stop me from divorcing you? It only makes me despise you more. It's time for me to put on a performance again. Honey, I don't know what's come over me. Everything I said earlier was just out of anger. The thought of you taking me to the Civil Affairs Bureau to divorce right after leaving the hospital, I deliberately mentioned the word divorce. Such matters can change if delayed, and I'm sure Leah would be more than happy to push this forward. She'd definitely give me a helping hand. Leah didn't disappoint me. She kept persuading Ethan, and sure enough, the more she urged, the more resolute Ethan became. Leah, don't worry. I'll make sure to settle this properly. Since Ava's fine, I'll take care of the formalities first and then come back to be with you. Leah nodded affectionately. Ethan, Ava, and I will be waiting for you. Ethan stood up. Celia, let's go. Nothing can change the outcome of our divorce. If you know what's good for you, don't cause any more trouble, or else all the conditions I promised you before will be void. This threat genuinely scared me, but I feigned indifference on my face. Ethan, you know I've never wanted anything from you. Money is just worldly possessions, all I want is to be with you. Dragged into the car by Ethan, who even had bodyguards stationed around to prevent me from running away to avoid the divorce, I couldn't help but laugh coldly in my heart. Half an hour later, at the Civil Affairs Bureau. Staff, are you really sure about the divorce? Have you reached an agreement on property division? We've reached an agreement and signed the documents. As Ethan said this, he suddenly remembered they had rushed to the hospital and hadn't brought the divorce agreement. He instructed his secretary to fetch it. Hearing Ethan's words, I took out the divorce agreement from my bag. No need, I already brought it with me. Ethan gave me a surprised look upon hearing this, his face once again filled with suspicion. After all, when it didn't involve Leah, Ethan still had some intellect left. Ethan couldn't help but feel that Celia was even more eager than he was to get a divorce. That couldn't be, this woman must be using such tactics to feign retreat in order to advance. He wouldn't let Celia succeed. Seeing Ethan hesitating to sign, I scoffed coldly. What's wrong? Did you change your mind about divorcing me? Do you think I'm better than your precious Leah, so now you're having second thoughts? Ethan couldn't stand hearing such words. How could he possibly care about a woman like me? Despite the doubt swirling in his mind, without hesitation, he picked up the pen and signed. When the staff member stamped the document and handed over the divorce certificate, I breathed a huge sigh of relief and felt completely relaxed. However, I didn't let myself get carried away. After all, I still had to wait for the assets agreed upon in the settlement to be transferred to my name. If Ethan had any intention of making things difficult, I really wouldn't have the power to resist. Before this, I was afraid that Ethan would go back on his word and retract the conditions he had offered. What happened at the hospital had been a bit risky. Celia, we are divorced now. I hope you won't bother me again in the future. Take the assets I've given you and live a peaceful life. I didn't argue. I obediently left as Ethan requested. Before leaving, I overheard Ethan instructing his subordinates to suppress the news. What happened at the hospital today must not be reported. Heh. Sitting in the taxi, I curled the corner of my lips without any intention to stop it. The evidence was already stashed away here anyway, ready to be dug up whenever needed. Exposing Leah's true colors too early would ruin the fun. Once Ethan and Leah got married, thoroughly entangled, I'd present them with a special wedding gift, a bombshell so explosive, Ethan wouldn't even realize his hat had turned green. Right now, the most urgent matter is to prioritize asset transfers as soon as possible. Early the next morning, I called Ethan's secretary. Ethan's secretary still held some sympathy for me as his ex-wife. Over the years, he had witnessed how I treated Ethan. When I called, he didn't give me a hard time and efficiently handled the transfer of the house and shops, as promised. Along with the 40 million yen in compensation Ethan had agreed to and the 50 million yen in installments, a total of 90 million yen was deposited into my account. With the property and a huge sum of money in hand, I calculated the timing and bought a stock 3 days later. In my previous life, I had come across an online post about a stock market legend, an investor whose stock multiplied 20-fold within 2 months. At that time, I even made a point of checking what stock it was. Back then, I could never have imagined I'd get a chance at rebirth. It seems this was a golden opportunity sent from above. No one ever complains about having too much money. With the compensation Ethan gave me, plus the initial capital to buy the stock, I was set. I invested 50 million into the stock market at once. For those 2 months, I had no mind to pay attention to anything else. I was solely focused on the market, waiting for the right day to sell off my shares. When my bank account grew by 1 billion, it truly meant I could lie back and enjoy the rest of my life. Thanks to the stocks, over those 2 months, I ended up shedding quite a bit of weight. The news about Ethan and Leah caught my eye again on the front page of the entertainment section. With me out of the way, Leah successfully married the wealthy cat she had her eyes on, Ethan, becoming a rich society wife. Meanwhile, my former mother-in-law called me and asked to meet up. As for this ex-mother-in-law, there's no affection between us. Ethan's condescending attitude was inherited from her. During my years in their family, aside from Ethan's emotional neglect, this ex-mother-in-law never missed an opportunity to belittle and make things difficult for me. However, after some consideration, I decided to meet my ex-mother-in-law one last time. We arranged to meet at an upscale cafe. My ex-mother-in-law was as elegantly dressed as ever. When she saw me in my sportswear, her face involuntarily showed a trace of disdain. No wonder Ethan couldn't stand you and divorced you. Just look at how utterly unrefined you are. In the past, every word of contempt or rejection from her would have crushed me and left me heartbroken. But now, hearing such remarks while knowing the destitute life she would soon face, I felt nothing but vindication. Truly, karma is real. You called me here just to say this? Thinking of her purpose for today, Victoria finally reined in her disdain. You're so useless. After being by Ethan's side for so many years, you still couldn't keep his heart, letting him be snatched away by that shameless bitch, Leah. Although she didn't like Celia as her daughter-in-law, compared to Leah, a cunning woman who was already divorced and had a daughter, it was clear that Leah was after her son's money, which made Victoria dislike her even more. Moreover, Leah actually dared to drive a wedge between her and her son, which was absolutely intolerable. She came today intending to pit Celia and Leah against each other. She could see that her son wasn't entirely devoid of feelings for Celia, otherwise, he wouldn't have left her so much of the estate. At the time, she hadn't known. By the time she found out, it was too late to stop it. Celia, I still prefer you as my daughter-in-law. Go back to Ethan. With me backing you up, you're still the better match for him. So this was why she called me here today. Listening to my former mother-in-law's condescending encouragement to fight Leah, I couldn't help but find it ridiculous. Victoria, you've got it wrong. Back then, I was blind to have ever been interested in such a man. A scumbag and a shameless woman are the perfect match. Weren't you always complaining I wasn't sharp enough? Well, now Leah as your daughter-in-law is a perfect fit. Such a daughter-in-law is just right to torment a wicked mother-in-law like you. You're the ideal family, after all. In the past, I always obeyed my mother-in-law without question, rarely going against her wishes. Even when feeling wronged, I endured it silently. She had grown accustomed to flaunting her superiority, never expecting me to say such things. Her face flushed with anger as she clutched her chest. Victoria, after all the time we've spent as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, as a parting gift, I'm giving you something special. I'm sure you'll like it. Celia, don't think you can gloat just because you walked away with so much of my son's wealth. A divorced woman like you, do you really think you'll ever find someone better than Celia? You threw away a golden opportunity, and you'll regret it someday. I watched Victoria's furious outburst without arguing. Time would reveal the truth to everyone. Placing the USB drive on the table, I walked away without a care, unconcerned about the storm it would stir in their family. I sent a USB drive containing the same content to the entertainment reporters. Although Leah wouldn't have an easy time after Ethan's family went bankrupt, even a few months of comfort were more than I wanted her to enjoy. That USB drive held all of Leah's dirty laundry. After handling these matters, I rushed to buy a plane ticket and flew out of S-City overnight. With enough money, I could travel far and wide, staying clear of any retaliation from Ethan's family. While abroad, I kept an eye on domestic news. In the entertainment section, I saw reports of Ethan and Leah getting into a physical altercation at a social event, sparking rumors of a marital crisis before supposedly reconciling. There were also comments from Mrs. Victoria airing her grievances about her daughter-in-law. Clearly, Leah wasn't having a good time. I returned just before Ethan's family declared bankruptcy. I was strutting in my towering high heels, followed by a row of muscular, 1.8-meter tall handsome guys carrying my suitcases and bags, occasionally handing me water and feeding me fruit, pampering me to absolute comfort. Indeed, money is a wonderful thing. With it, you can have any type of handsome guy, each one considerate, gentle, and providing impeccable service. Celia, I never thought you'd sink this low. Can't you survive without me? Is this how you debase yourself? A voice filled with heartache and indignation exploded in my ears, startling me. I originally came back just to watch the commotion, but unexpectedly ran into Ethan at the airport. Ethan looked utterly exhausted, as if he'd aged several years. The handsome, sun-kissed man beside me quickly patted my back gently to comfort me. Sweetheart, were you startled? Who's so rude and uncouth, yelling like that? It must have frightened you. Seeing this scene, Ethan's expression darkened further. He strode over and threw a punch at the tanned hunk who had been patting my back. The handsome sunny guy was gentle and caring towards me, but he wasn't so kind to Ethan. After taking a punch, he immediately retaliated, leaving Ethan with a bleeding lip as he glared at me hatefully. I met Ethan's gaze directly. Ethan, what's with that look? Do I seem like I can't survive without you? Now that I'm free from a scumbag like you, I've realized how vibrant and fulfilling life can be. With the breakup money you gave me, I've traveled across beautiful landscapes and dated all sorts of charming men. That's when I truly understood what joy life has to offer. Fine, very well. Celia, since I was the one who gave you this good life, I can also take it all back. You'll regret everything you've done. Ethan shot me a sharp, cold glare before turning to leave. Compared to before, there was a newfound ruthlessness in his demeanor. I curled my lips, not the slightest bit intimidated. The current Ethan was just a paper tiger with no bite, about to come crashing down from his high pedestal into the muck any moment now. Besides, compared to a certain someone, Ethan's so-called imposing presence hardly counted for anything. Just thinking about that person sent a shiver down my spine. He'd once told me that if I dared to escape, he'd break my legs and lock me by his side. Thankfully, that man didn't know my identity, there was no way he could find me. With a lineup of handsome men in tow, I strode out of the airport where luxury cars were already waiting. The moment I got into one, a pair of strong arms pulled me into an embrace. Celia, have you had your fun? You can't take back your promise to marry me, you know. The man's voice was tender, affectionate, and yet carried an undercurrent of danger. Hearing that voice sent chills down my spine, but it was already too late to escape. This was a troubled bond one had unintentionally formed during my time in Country A, all because I got drunk at a bar, took a fancy to a male model named Xavier, and brought him home. One night of passion later, I realized he was no mere model. When I tried to hand him a check the next morning to send him on his way, Xavier's expression darkened. He shoved a check back at me, for 10 times the amount, before pinning me down and teaching me a lesson I would never forget. Later I found out that this Xavier was no ordinary man. Even in Country A, he commanded significant influence. A dangerous man like that was beyond my league. I wanted to break free, but it wasn't easy. Finally, I seized an opportunity to slip away, escaping Xavier's sphere of control. I could once again enjoy the company of all sorts of handsome men, no longer under the thumb of that domineering brute. But on my very first day back home, Xavier caught me. Xavier, you know, I was drunk, it didn't count. Besides, I'm just a divorced woman. Maybe a little pretty, but with no substance. Honestly, I'm just ordinary. Please, be merciful and let me go. Ridiculous. Forget about how dangerous Xavier is, I haven't even managed to uncover the slightest clue about his background. After finally climbing out of the pit that was marriage, there's no way I'm diving headfirst into another one. Is Celia breaking the contract? The man smiled ever more gently, but I instinctively sensed extreme danger, recalling his ruthless methods in Country A. Nothing of the sort. How could I break the contract? I just need some time. A wise man submits to circumstances. Holding back tears, I lamented my folly. How did I end up provoking such a ruthless adversary, and how could I possibly break free now? Xavier looked at this naive woman, once caught in his sights, she'd never escape in this lifetime. On a certain day in a certain month of a certain year, a grand wedding took place in City A. By this time, Harrington Group had already gone bankrupt. After the bankruptcy of Harrington Group, Leah immediately divorced Ethan and attempted to flee with the last remnants of the family's money. However, Ethan saw through her scheme and devised a plan to sell her off to an old and ugly man in a remote mountain village. Ethan, weak from hunger, fainted and in his dazed state, dreamt of many things entirely different from his current life. When he woke up and raised his head, he saw the woman's blissful smile on the big screen, shedding tears of regret. Nearby, several police officers approached. Ethan, you are suspected of human trafficking. Please come with us for questioning. The day Ethan was shoved into the police van, a cold rain was falling over London. His disheveled hair clung to his face, his once 7-figure custom suit crumpled like a rag, dried blood still smeared at the corner of his mouth. Passers-by filmed him on their phones as he roared like a caged beast, Celia. Just you wait. Outside the frame, Celia reclined in the back seat of a Rolls-Royce Phantom, swirling a glass of 1982 Lafite with leisurely elegance. From the passenger seat, Xavier turned to kiss her, his voice low and adoring. Celia, should we roll the window down? Let him see exactly the life you're living now. The car window rolled down 3 inches. Ethan froze. He saw the woman who had once begged him in tears not to divorce now dressed in Queen's couture haute couture, wearing a 312-carat Ravenscraig blue diamond around her neck. The man beside her held her waist with one hand, his Patek Philippe watch face larger than his own. Even more glaring were the row of iPads in the back seat, displaying real-time updates from major global exchanges. The final 3 minutes before Harrington Group delisted, the £4.7 billion she had shorted had just landed. Ethan. Celia called his name softly, her voice dripping with sickly sweetness. Didn't you say you'd make me regret this? She raised her hand, flashing the ring finger of her left hand, the 50-carat pink diamond wedding band blindingly radiant even through the rain. Too bad, the only thing I regret now is not dumping you sooner. The police car door slammed shut. Through the window, Ethan watched as she set down her wineglass and lazily snapped her fingers. The next second, the screen switched, footage of his wedding with Shenli, a live stream of Shenli being sold to a remote Scottish village, Zhao Jinping tearfully accusing her daughter-in-law of swindling her life savings in court. All of it looped on the most prominent billboard in London's financial district, flanked by bold red text scrolling. The Harrington family declared bankrupt, former heir arrested for human trafficking. The crowd erupted in cheers. Someone recognized Celia's car and shouted, "Queen C! Queen C!" She smiled and waved to the outside, like a queen acknowledging her subjects. Before the car started, Xavier leaned in and kissed her, whispering words only they could hear. Heading home? The fireplace at Ravenscraig Castle is lit, and tonight, the entire London fireworks are just for you. Nestled in his arms, Celia chuckled softly. No rush, let the fireworks burn for 10 more minutes. Let certain people see clearly what it means, to truly rise to glory. The car window rolled up. The Rolls-Royce slowly drove away. In the rain, Ethan was shoved headfirst into a police car, vanishing completely from the rearview mirror. As the first firework burst in the London sky, it exploded into the letter CX. The entire city was crowning her.